Jake stepped into the crowded bar, the warm buzz of laughter and clinking glasses masking his intent. This wasn't a night for a drink. He was here for one thing. After years of searching, there he was, the man who took everything from him, sitting alone, casually swirling a glass of whiskey. Jake's heart raced, fists clenched. He had rehearsed this moment countless times, but now, facing the man who shattered his world, words felt useless. Their eyes locked. The man smirked. He knew. He was daring Jake to make a move. In a low, steady voice, Jake broke the silence. "We need to talk." The man stood, flashing a confident grin, gesturing toward the back exit. They stepped outside, the sound of the bar fading behind them. Jake clenched his fists, the tension building. Tonight he would finally have his chance. This was his moment. One way or another, this would end here. The rain poured down in the dark alley, shadows stretching under a flickering streetlight. Jake stood face to face with the man who destroyed his life, gripping his arm with iron determination. This wasn't some chance encounter. Tonight was about revenge. "You've been chasing ghosts, Jake," the man sneered, trying to hide his fear. "All these years for nothing." But Jake's resolve was unbreakable. "Not for nothing. I'm here to make sure you pay." In a flash, he noticed the man's hand moving for a weapon. Instinct kicked in. Jake twisted his arm and a small pistol clattered to the ground. For the first time, fear flickered in the man's eyes as he dropped to his knees. The tables had turned. Tonight, Jake was in control. The rain poured down harder, as if washing away years of betrayal. And Jake was ready to end this, once and for all. In the pouring rain, Jake held his enemy on his knees, the flickering alley light casting shadows across their faces. This was the man who'd destroyed everything Jake held dear, now defenseless before him. But just as Jake tightened his grip, he heard footsteps echoing down the alley. Two figures emerged, dark coats blending into the night. Reinforcements. Jake's heart pounded. This wasn't over. "You thought it'd be that easy, didn't you?" The man sneered, regaining his smug grin. "I never work alone." Jake's mind raced. He was outnumbered, but he wasn't about to let his chance slip away. He spun around, grabbing the pistol from the ground, eyes sharp, ready to face his new enemies. The rain fell harder, tension thick in the air. Outnumbered but unshaken, Jake braced himself. Tonight, he would face them all, no matter the cost. As Jake stood in the rain, pistol in hand, memories of that fateful night flashed before him. He wasn't just fighting the men in front of him. He was fighting his past. It had been 5 years ago, a night not unlike this one. He had come home to find his house in flames. The screams of his wife and daughter echoed in his ears as he ran toward the inferno, only to be stopped by neighbors pulling him back. He'd fought them off, desperate to save his family, but it was too late. The fire had been no accident. It was a message, a cruel punishment for debts Jake hadn't even known he owed. And the man before him now? He was the one who lit the match. "You remember, don't you?" the man sneered, his voice dragging Jake back to the present. Jake's knuckles turned white around the pistol. "I remember everything." But remembering wasn't enough. That night, as he buried the ones he loved, he had vowed to make the people responsible pay. He had no choice but to leave everything behind. His job, his home, even his name. He became a ghost, tracking every lead, every whisper of the man who destroyed his life. It was years of dead ends and false hope until finally he found him. And now, here they were. "You think you're the only one who's lost something?" the man said, trying to rise to his feet. Jake pressed the pistol against his chest, forcing him back down. "No," Jake replied. "But I am the only one who's going to do something about it." Jake thought of the years he'd spent training for this moment. After losing his family, he had nothing left to lose. He sought out mentors, Former soldiers, street fighters, anyone who could teach him how to fight, how to survive. He learned how to wield a gun, throw a punch, and take one without flinching. "You turned me into this," Jake said, his voice low. "You created your own worst nightmare." "Oh, come on," the man said, trying to muster his old bravado. "You think this will bring them back? Killing me won't fix anything." Jake's grip on the pistol faltered, just for a moment. The man's words hit a nerve, but Jake pushed the doubt aside. "No," Jake admitted, his voice like steel, "but it'll stop you from ruining anyone else's life." As the rain poured down, Jake remembered the nights he spent reliving his family's final moments. He didn't want revenge for closure. He wanted revenge so no one else would suffer the way he had. Jake lowered the pistol for a moment, letting the man feel a flicker of hope. Then, with a swift motion, he grabbed the man by the collar and dragged him to his feet. "I've spent every day since that night preparing for this," Jake said, his voice calm but filled with fury. "You think you're the hunter, but you're wrong. You're prey." The man's bravado cracked. He tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. "And what are you going to do, Jake? Shoot me in the street?" Jake leaned in close, his eyes cold. "No. I'm going to make sure you rot." With that, Jake slammed him against the wall, knocking him unconscious. The fight was over, for now. But Jake's journey was far from done. Jake dragged the unconscious man into the shadows, tying him with a discarded cable. The two figures who had appeared earlier weren't far, their footsteps growing louder. Jake crouched low, weapon ready. The men entered the alley, their eyes scanning for their target. Jake watched closely. These weren't random thugs. Their precise movements and silent communication screamed professional. "I told you to come alone," one of them said, his voice icy. Jake realized the man he captured wasn't the mastermind. He was bait. Before Jake could react, a low chuckle echoed from above. Jake glanced up and froze. A shadowy figure stood on the rooftop, staring down at him. "Jake," the figure said, his voice calm, "you've come a long way, but this is far from over." The shadowy figure leaped down, landing gracefully in the alley. Jake recognized him instantly. Marcus, the man who orchestrated the fire, the man who destroyed his life. "I should have known you wouldn't settle for my second-in-command," Marcus said, nodding toward the tied-up man. Jake raised the pistol, aiming directly at Marcus. "This ends now." But before Jake could fire, the two henchmen moved in. Jake barely dodged the first strike, countering with a sharp elbow. The fight was quick and brutal, Jake's training keeping him alive. But Marcus didn't move to help his men. He simply watched, his smirk unwavering. "You're better than I expected," Marcus said, clapping slowly as Jake stood over the unconscious bodies. "But you're still playing checkers in a chess game." Jake turned to face Marcus, his pistol steady. "You think you're untouchable? You'll end up just like them." Marcus shook his head, almost pitying him. "Do you even know why your family was targeted?" Jake faltered. He had always assumed it was random, a cruel punishment for debts he didn't owe. But Marcus's words suggested otherwise. "You were never the target," Marcus said, his tone taunting. "Your wife. She wasn't who you thought she was." Jake's grip on the pistol tightened. "You're lying." Marcus shrugged. "Am I? Maybe you should have asked her about her past before you married her." The revelation shook Jake, but his resolve remained. He couldn't let Marcus manipulate him. "You killed them," Jake said, stepping closer. "I don't care why. You're going to pay for it." Marcus chuckled, pulling a small device from his pocket. "Oh, Jake, you still don't understand. This isn't about you. It's about control. And I've already won." With a press of a button, a deafening explosion rocked the alley. Jake was thrown back, landing hard on the wet pavement. Through the smoke, Marcus disappeared into the night. Dazed but alive, Jake struggled to his feet. The alley was in ruins, the unconscious henchman nowhere to be found. Marcus had escaped, but he'd left something behind, a small black notebook lying in the rubble. Jake picked it up, flipping through its pages. Names, addresses, dates. It was a ledger. Each entry was tied to crimes Marcus had orchestrated, including the fire that took his family. One name stood out: Carter Jameson. Jake recognized it instantly. Carter had been his wife's closest friend, someone Jake had trusted. Now his name was listed under co-conspirators. Jake tracked Carter down to a secluded cabin in the woods. He didn't bother with subtlety, kicking the door open. Carter scrambled to his feet, his face pale. "Jake, I can explain," Carter stammered. "Start talking," Jake growled, slamming him against the wall. Carter confessed in broken sentences. Jake's wife had been involved in a secretive organization, but when she tried to leave, they made her a target. Carter had been tasked with keeping tabs on her, but swore he never wanted her harmed. "You have to believe me," Carter begged. "I tried to warn her, but Marcus, he's unstoppable." Carter handed Jake an old USB drive, his hands trembling. "This has everything. Proof of what they've done. Names of people they've hurt. If you expose this, you can take them down." Jake hesitated. The drive could be a trap, but it was his best lead. "Why help me now?" Jake asked. Carter's eyes filled with guilt. "Because I owe her that much. And because Marcus won't stop until you're dead." Before Jake could respond, headlights flooded the cabin. Marcus's men had arrived. The cabin became a war zone as bullets tore through the walls. Jake and Carter scrambled for cover, returning fire with whatever they could find. "We're outnumbered," Carter shouted. "Stay down," Jake ordered, taking out two of Marcus's men with precision shots. When the gunfire ceased, Jake and Carter emerged from the wreckage, exhausted but alive. Carter handed Jake a key. "This will get you into Marcus's safe house. But be careful. He's expecting you." Jake followed Carter's lead, breaking into the safe house under the cover of night. Inside, he found files detailing Marcus's operations and plans for future attacks. But one document stopped him cold, a photo of his wife labeled Agent 47B terminated. Jake's mind raced. His wife wasn't just a victim. She was one of Marcus's operatives. Had she lied to him, or was she trying to protect him all along? Marcus's voice crackled through a nearby intercom. "I knew you'd come, Jake. Find anything interesting?" Jake grabbed the intercom, his voice cold. "You're finished, Marcus." Marcus laughed. "You think you know the truth, but you've barely scratched the surface. Come find me if you want answers." A set of coordinates printed on the desk led Jake to his next destination, an abandoned factory on the city's outskirts. The factory was a labyrinth of shadows and traps. Jake moved cautiously, his every step echoing through the empty halls. In the center of the factory, Marcus waited, surrounded by armed guards. "Welcome to the endgame, Jake," he said, arms outstretched. Jake gritted his teeth. "You think this is a game?" "Of course," Marcus said, smirking. "And I always win." The final showdown began, bullets flying as Jake fought his way through Marcus's guards. The factory became a battlefield, explosions lighting up the night. When Jake finally reached Marcus, he was battered but unbroken. "This ends now," he said, raising his pistol. Marcus smirked one last time. "You'll never know the full truth." With a single shot, Jake silenced him forever. As the factory burned behind him, Jake walked away, the USB drive clutched in his hand. He had destroyed Marcus, but the questions about his wife's past lingered. Jake knew his fight wasn't over. The organization Marcus led was still out there, and they would come for him. But now, he was ready. This was only the beginning. Message to the listener. If you enjoyed this part and want the next chapters of Jake's story to unfold, comment Part 2 below. Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes together.